Okay, it's now 3 o'clock, so I will begin. And this is one of the first sutta classes I've given for a while. Ajahn Brahm has been doing so many sutta retreats and little sutta classes on the weekend. So it's wonderful to be back here again to do a nice sutta. And the sutta which I chose today, or almost it chose me, the Mahāsaccakasutta, because there's a few points in this which I will focus on. And there's some points which I never realized were actually right in here, the beautiful teachings of the Dhamma. It is a long sutta, but nevertheless it's really worthwhile. It is the 36th sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, called the Greater Discourse to Saccaka. And I'm not exaggerating here, when I took out my copy of the middle length sayings in my office next to my cave, I took it out and I just opened it randomly and it fell out straight to Sutta 36, the first page. And I took that as a sign. It's really well worth teaching. So here we go. I just said those few things because there's a couple of people coming a little bit late and I don't want them to miss the beginning. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. I usually always love to do the Namo tassa Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami at the beginning of suttas, because these were taught by the Buddha. So the Greater Discourse to Saccaka. Thus have I heard. On one occasion the Buddha was living at Vaisali in the great wood in the hall with the peaked roof. Now on that occasion, when it was morning, the Buddha had finished dressing and taking his bowl and outer robe, desired to go into Vaisali for alms. Then as Saccaka the Jain, they called him Nigantaputta, which, like Sakyaputta, means that he was part of the Jain tradition. Then as Saccaka the Jain was walking and wandering for exercise, he came to the hall with the peaked roof in the great wood. The Venerable Ananda saw him coming in the distance and said to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, here comes Saccaka the Jain, a debater and a clever speaker, regarded by many as a saint. He wants to discredit the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. It would be good if the Buddha would sit down for a while out of compassion." So the Buddha sat down on a seat made ready. Then Saccaka the Jain went up to the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When his courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side and said to the Buddha, "Master Gotama." That's a respectful way of addressing the Buddha, but it's shown by just calling him Master Gotama that he wasn't a disciple. "Master Gotama, there are some recluses and Brahmins who abide pursuing development of the body, but not development of mind. They are touched by bodily painful feelings. In the past, when one was touched by bodily painful feelings, one's thighs would become rigid, one's heart would burst, and hot blood would gush from one's mouth, and one would go mad and go out of one's mind. So then the mind was subservient to the body. The body wielded mastery over it. Why is that? Because the mind was not developed. But there are some recluses and Brahmins who abide pursuing development of mind, but not development of body. They are touched by mental painful feeling. In the past, when one was touched by mental painful feelings, one's thighs would become rigid, one's heart would burst, hot blood would gush from one's mouth, and one would go mad, go out of one's mind. So then the body was subservient to the mind. the mind wielded mastery over it. Why is that? Because the body was not developed. Master Gautama, it has occurred to me, surely Master Gautama's disciples abide pursuing development of mind, but not development of body. And then the Buddha says, but Agiwasena, what have you learnt about development of body? Well, there are, for example, Nanda Vacha, Kisa Sankicha, Makali Gosala. They go naked, rejecting conventions, licking their hands, not coming when asked, not stopping when asked. They do not accept food brought or food specially made, nor an invitation to a meal. They receive nothing from a pot, from a bowl, across a threshold, across a stick, across a pestle. They do not accept from two eating together, from a pregnant woman, from a woman giving suck, from a woman in the midst of men, from where food is advertised to be distributed, from where a dog is waiting, from where flies are buzzing. They accept no fish or meat. They drink no liquor, wine, or fermented brew. They keep to one house, to one morsel. They keep to 2 houses, to 2 morsels. They keep to 7 houses, to 7 morsels. They live on 1 saucerful a day, on 2 saucerfuls a day, on 7 saucerfuls a day. They take food once a day, once every 2 days, once every 7 days, thus even up to once every fortnight. They dwell pursuing the practice of taking food at stated intervals. But do they subsist on so little? Agiwasena? No, Master Gautama. They consume excellent food, hard food and soft food, taste excellent delicacies, drink excellent drinks. Thereby they again retain their strength, fortify themselves, and become fat. What they earlier abandoned, they later gather together again. That is how there is increase and decrease of this body. But what have you learned about development of mind? When Saccaka the Jain was asked by the Buddha about development of mind, he was unable to answer. Then the Buddha told him, what you have just spoken of as development of body, Agiwasena, is not development of body according to the Dhamma in the Noble One's discipline. Since you do not know what development of the body is, how could you know what development of the mind is? Nevertheless, Agiwasena, as to how one is developed in body and undeveloped in mind, and developed in body and developed in mind, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, sir, Saccaka the Jain replied, and the Buddha said this. How, Agiwasena, is one developed in body and undeveloped in mind? Here, Agiwasena, a pleasant feeling arises in an untaught ordinary person. Touched by that pleasant feeling, he lusts after pleasure and continues to lust after pleasure. That pleasant feeling of his ceases. With the cessation of that pleasant feeling, painful feeling arises. Touched by that painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves and laments, and he weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. When that pleasant feeling has arisen in him, it invades his mind and remains, because the body is not developed. And when that painful feeling has arisen in him, it invades his mind and remains because the mind is not developed. Anyone in whom, in this double manner, arisen pleasant feeling invades his mind and remains because body is not developed, and arisen painful feeling invades his mind and remains because his mind is not developed, in thus undeveloped in body, because mind is not developed, is thus undeveloped in body and undeveloped in mind. And how, Agiwasena, is one developed in body and developed in mind? Here, Agiwasena, pleasant feeling arises in a well-taught noble disciple. Touched by that pleasant feeling, they do not lust after pleasure or continue to lust after pleasure. That pleasant feeling of his ceases. With the cessation of that pleasant feeling, painful feeling arises. Touched by that painful feeling, he does not sorrow, grieve and lament. He does not weep, beating his breast and become distraught. When that pleasant feeling has arisen in him, it does not invade his mind and remain, because the body is developed. When the painful feeling has arisen in him, it does not invade his mind and remain, because the mind is developed. Anyone in whom, in this double manner, arisen pleasant feeling does not invade his mind and remain, because the body is developed, and arisen painful feeling does not invade his mind and remain, because the mind is developed, is thus developed in body and developed in mind. I have confidence in Master Gautama. Thus, Master Gautama is developed in body and developed in mind. And the way he said, Buddha replied, "Surely, Akiwasana, your words are offensive and discourteous, but still I will answer you. Since I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and went forth from the home life into homelessness, it has not been possible for arisen pleasant feeling to invade my mind and remain, or for arisen painful feeling to evade my mind and remain. Has there never arisen in Master Gautama a feeling so pleasant that could invade his mind and remain? Has there never arisen in Master Gautama a feeling so painful that it could invade his mind and remain? Why not, Akiwasana? Here, Akiwasana, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, and the reason I mentioned this and paused on this, that just having a discussion just over 8 days ago, that when people said, even in Theravada, they always mention the Buddha as a bodhisattva, but that was only from the time when the Buddha descended from his previous life in the Tusita realm into this realm, and until the time when he was fully enlightened. From that period, from the time of the descent from the Tusita realm until the enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in this life, then they called him Bodhisattva, but it was always preceded by unenlightened. If you're a Bodhisattva, according to the Theravada texts, it's always an unenlightened Bodhisattva. As soon as you're enlightened, then you're not called a Bodhisattva anymore. You're the Buddha, or an Arahant. So, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened Bodhisattva, I thought, household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy while living in a home to lead the holy life utterly perfect and pure. In those days they used a simile as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from home life into homelessness. And later, while still young, and a black-haired young man endowed with the blessing of youth in the prime of life, and this is a common passage, so it was just it was shortened. And then when he was ready to actually went forth, and then when he was ready to start practicing, he said, I sat down there thinking, this will stir for striving. Now 3 similes occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. This is one of the other reasons why I mentioned this sutta, because these are really brilliant similes. Suppose there were a wet, sappy piece of wood lying in the water, and a man came with an upper fire stick thinking, I shall light a fire, I shall produce heat. What do you think, Akiwasana? Could the man light a fire and produce heat by taking the upper fire stick and rubbing it against a wet, sappy piece of wood lying in the water? No, Master Gautama. Why not? Because it is a wet, sappy piece of wood, and it is lying in the water. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So too, Akiwasana. As to those recluses and Brahmins who still do not live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures, and whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst and fever for sensual pleasures has not been fully abandoned and suppressed internally, even if those good recluses and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. They are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. And even if those good recluses and Brahmins do not feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. This was the first simile that occurred to me, spontaneously never heard before. And again, Aggiwesana, a second simile occurred to me, spontaneously never heard before. Suppose there were a wet, sappy piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water, and a man came with an upper fire stick thinking, I shall light a fire, I shall produce heat. What do you think, Aggiwesana? Could the man light a fire and produce heat by taking the upper fire stick and rubbing it against the wet, sappy piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water? No, Master Gautama. Why not? Because it is a wet, sappy piece of wood. Even though it is lying on dry land, far from water, eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So too, Aggiwesana, as to those recluses and Brahmins who live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures, but whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and fever for sensual pleasures has not been fully abandoned and suppressed internally, even if those good recluses and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. And even if those good recluses and Brahmins do not feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. This was the second simile that occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. And again, Aggiwesana, a third simile occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. And you always know there's only three similes. We always do things in threes in the Dhamma. A third simile occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. Suppose there was a dry, sapless piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water, and a man came with an upper fire stick thinking, I shall light a fire, I shall produce heat. What do you think, Aggiwesana? Could the man light a fire and produce heat by rubbing it against a dry, sapless piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water? Yes, Master Gautama. Why so? Because it is a dry, sapless piece of wood and is lying on dry land, far from water. So too, Aggiwesana, as to those recluses and Brahmins who live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures and whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and fever for sensual pleasures has been fully abandoned and suppressed internally, even if those good recluses and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are capable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. And even if those good recluses and Brahmins do not feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are capable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. This was the third simile that occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. These are the three similes that occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. I love that simile simply because it shows it's not so much the exertion which produces deep states of meditation and enlightenment, but the living far away from sensory pleasures and desires, so that your mind just gets dry from them and is easily lit by the flames of things like samadhi. Anyway, I thought, suppose with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. So too, with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrained, and crushed mind with mind. While I did so, sweat ran from my armpits, just as a strong man might seize a weaker man by the head or shoulders and beat him down, constrain him, and crush him. So too, with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrained, and crushed mind with mind, and sweat ran from my armpits. But although tireless energy was aroused in me, an unremitting mindfulness was established. My body was overwrought and uncalm, because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. And I wanted to mention this piece here because when we have the ways of overcoming distracting thoughts, one of those ways, the last way, which sometimes I say is just almost like the last resort in case nothing else works, only to be used when it's really dangerous, about pressing the tongue against the roof of the mouth and beating down, constraining and crushing your mind with your mind. What happens there is your body becomes overwrought and uncalm and you become exhausted. And later on, when you read things like the Dhammaloka Sutta, the first sutra of the Buddha, it says specifically there, don't do anything which is atta kilamatanu yoga. Kilamata means tiring, exhausting. And this is don't do anything which exhausts the mind and the body. So this is he was saying what he was doing when he started his path. I thought, suppose I practice a breathingless meditation. So I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth and nose. While I did so, there was a loud sound of winds coming out of my ear holes. Just there is a loud sound when the smith's bellows are blown. So too, while I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my nose and ears, there was a loud sound of winds coming out from my ear holes. But although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feelings that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. I thought, suppose I practice further the breathingless meditation. So I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears. And while I did so, violent winds cut through my head, just as if a strong man were to crush my head with the tip of a sharp sword. So too, while I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears, violent winds cut through my head. But although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. I thought, suppose I practice further the breathingless meditation. So I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears. While I did so, there were violent pains in my head, just as if a strong man were tightening a tough leather strap around my head as a headband. So too, when I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears, there were violent pains in my head. But although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. I thought, suppose I practice further the breathingless meditation. See what happens next. And one of the reasons I read all this out, because I did notice when people go to museums or they go to, I remember just going to, not Windsor Castle, to Warwick Castle years ago, and everybody wanted to go down to see the dungeons. And even in the monastery where I used to teach meditation up in Malaysia, in the Genting Highlands, even there they had all these pictures of what happens to you if you do bad things and you go to hell. And people love watching those pictures. There's something about the human nature that we become fascinated by suffering. But anyway, here we go, the next type of suffering. I practiced further the breathingless meditation. I stopped the in-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears, and while I did so, violent winds carved up my belly, just as if a skilled butcher or his apprentice were to carve up an ox's belly with a sharp butcher's knife. So too, when I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears, violent winds carved up my belly, But although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feelings that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. I thought, suppose I practice further the breathingless meditation. What's going to happen next? So I stopped the in-breath and the out-breath with my mouth, nose and ears. While I did so, there was a violent burning in my body, just as if two strong men were to seize a weaker man by both arms and roast him over a pit of hot coals. So too, when I stopped the in-breath and out-breath with my mouth, nose and ears, there was a violent burning in my body. But although tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Or, I think the computer is...
Page down, key there, bottom right.
Bottom right, this one here?
No, next to it.
That one there?
Goes up and down. Does that work?
No. My goodness. The computer's got so upset about what we're reading out. It's not working. Help! No. It seems to have frozen. Tech assistance. It was going really well until then. Any questions?
It doesn't move.
No.
No.
It's frozen. Ah, it does now. Very good.
Now, because
You-
you mind that the cursor, if it goes up here,
Yeah?
when you move, it doesn't work.
Okay, yeah.
When it's here, it
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, when deities saw me, some said, the recluse Gautama is dead. Other deities said, the recluse Gautama is not dead, he is dying. Another deity said, the recluse Gautama is not dead nor dying, he's an arahat, for such is the way that arahats abide. I thought, suppose I practice entirely cutting off food. The deities came to me and said, good sir, do not practice entirely cutting off food. If you do so, we shall infuse heavenly food into the pores of your skin, and you will live on that. And I considered, if I claim to be completely fasting, while these deities infuse heavenly food into the pores of my skin and I live on that, then I shall be lying. So I dismissed those deities, saying there is no need. I thought, suppose I take very little food, a handful each time, whether of bean soup or lentil soup or veg soup or pea soup. So I took very little food, a handful each time, whether of bean soup, lentil soup, veg soup or pea soup. While I did so, my body reached a state of extreme emaciation. Because of eating so little, my limbs became like jointed segments of vine stems, of bamboo stems. Because of eating so little, my backside became like a camel's hoof. I'm not quite sure I understand that because I've never seen camel's hoofs. But because of eating so little, the projections on my spine stood forth like corded beads. Because of eating so little, my ribs jutted out as gaunt as the crazy rafters of an old roofless barn. Because of eating so little, the gleam of my eyes sank far down in their sockets, looking like the gleam of water that has sunk far down in a deep well. Because of eating so little, my scalp shriveled and withered as a green bitter gourd shrivels and withers in the wind and the sun. Because of eating so little, my belly skin adhered to my backbone. Thus, if I touched my belly skin, I encountered my backbone. If I touched my backbone, I encountered my belly skin. Because of eating so little, if I defecated or urinated, I fell over on my face there. Because of eating so little, I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands. The hair, rotted at its roots, fell from my body as I rubbed. Now, when people saw me, some said the recluse Gautama is black. Other people said the recluse Gautama is not black, he is brown. Other people said the recluse Gautama is neither black nor brown, he is golden skinned. So much had the clear, bright colour of my skin deteriorated through eating so little. And I thought, whatever recluses or Brahmins in the past have experienced painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. This is the utmost. There is none beyond this. And whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will experience painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. This is the utmost. There is none beyond this. And whatever recluses and Brahmins at present experience painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. This is the utmost. There is none beyond this. But by this racking practicing of austerities, I have not attained any superhuman states, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of noble ones. Could there be another path to enlightenment? So that's like the hard part of the story so far. Now we get to the nice part. So we can now just enjoy it a little bit more. And this is where it's said, having done all of that, those austerities, got nowhere. He considered, I recall that when my father, the Sakyan, was occupied, while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree. I'm just going to mention that the cool shade, that was important. In other words, his body was comfortable. Quite secluded from the five senses, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Could that be the path to enlightenment? Then, following on that memory, came the realization that is indeed the path to enlightenment, to Sambodhi. And I repeat that because that's one of the phrases when I first saw that, yes, all those austerities are not the path. The path to enlightenment, when my father the Sakya was occupied, I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from the five senses, secluded from unwholesome states. I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Could that be the path to enlightenment? And following on that memory came the realization that is indeed the path to enlightenment. And I thought, why am I afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? And I thought, I am not afraid of that pleasure, since it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. So that's where, when somebody said the other day that people think, it was supposed to be a talk on enlightenment, the path to enlightenment, that people emphasize too much upon the meditation path. And just have this quote here. The Buddha said that meditation, those jhanas, that they were the path to enlightenment. I considered, and this is the next interesting part of the practice of meditation, I considered it is not easy, it's not impossible, but it's not easy to attain that pleasure with a body so excessively emaciated. Suppose I ate some solid food, some boiled rice and porridge, and I ate some solid food, some boiled rice and porridge. Now at that time, the 5 monks were waiting upon me, thinking if our recluse Gautama achieved some higher states, he would inform us. But when I ate the boiled rice and porridge, the 5 bhikkhus, those first 5 disciples, were disgusted and left me, thinking the recluse Gautama now lives luxuriously, as he has given up his striving and reverted to luxury. I think I mentioned this many times in my talks. Those first 5 disciples, they just abandoned him. They couldn't understand just looking after your body, not indulging it, but eating and sleeping and washing. They thought that was indulging. But when I had eaten solid food and regained my strength, then quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana. But such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain, forever. With the stilling of the last movement of the mind, I entered upon and abided in the second jhana. With the fading away as well of rapture, I entered upon and abided in the third jhana. with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, I entered upon and abided in the fourth jhana, but such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. In other words, it didn't take over his mind, in a sense of controlling his mind. When my stilled mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to knowledge of the recollection of past lives. I recollected my manifold past lives with their aspects and particulars. This was the first true knowledge attained by me in the first watch of the night. Ignorance, or rather delusion, was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose, as happens in one who abides diligent, ardent, and resolute. But such pleasant feelings that arose in my mind did not invade my mind and remain. When my stilled mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. Thus, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpassed the human, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and I understood how beings pass on according to their karma. This was the second true knowledge attained by me in the middle watch of the night. Delusion was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose, as happens in one who abides diligent, ardent, and resolute. But such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. When my stilled mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to knowledge of the destructions of the outflowings. These are the asawas. In the text, they usually use a saying, the taints. Of course, the taints don't really have much of a meaning which gives us any deeper insight into what these things are. I prefer to call them the outflowings, that the mind, you going out into the world, searching for something, flowing out. And once those are stopped, you stay inside and because of stillness start to disappear, then there's a sense of freedom and peace. I directly knew it as it actually is. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Those are the Four Noble Truths. And similarly, these are the outflowings, the asava. This is the origin. This is the cessation of the outflowings. This is the way leading to the cessation of the outflowings. When I knew and saw thus, my mind was liberated from the three outflowings here. The outflowing of sensory desire, from the outflowing of being, of wanting to be something, of existence, and from the outflowing of delusion. When it was liberated, there came the knowledge, it is liberated. And all the time, whenever someone gets liberated, not enlightened, don't know it, always comes the knowledge, it is liberated. I directly knew birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, and what had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. This was the third true knowledge attained by me in the last watch of the night. Delusion was banished, true knowledge arose, darkness was banished, and light arose, as happens in one who abides diligent, ardent, and resolute. But such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Agiwasena. I recall teaching the Dhamma to an assembly of many hundreds, and even then each person thinks of me. The recluse Gautama is teaching the Dhamma especially for me. But it should not be so regarded. The Buddha teaches the Dhamma to others only to give them knowledge. When the talk is finished, Agiwasena, then I steady my mind internally, quieten it, bring it to singleness, and still it on the same sign of stillness as before, in which I constantly abide. And that answers one of the questions I had as a monk. Sometimes when we chant the Ratana Sutta, they said the Buddha abided in the most excellent of samadhis. And this is what he was talking about. When teaching, he would teach, but then after the teaching was over, he'd still his mind and go into the deep state of stillness, which was there all the time. And this is a matter about which Master Gotama can be trusted as an accomplished and fully enlightened one should be. But then the Jain, Saccaka the Jain, just tried once again. But does Master Gotama recall sleeping during the day? I recall, Aggiwesana, in the last month of the hot season, on returning from my alms round, after my meal, I lay out my outer robe folded in four, and lying down on my right side, I fall asleep, mindful and fully aware. Aha! I just put that in there, it's not in this text. Some recluses and Brahmins call that abiding in delusion, Master Gotama. It is not in such a way that one is deluded or undeluded, Aggiwesana. As to how one is deluded or undeluded, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, sir, Saccaka the Jain replied. And the Buddha said, I've done it again. No, it's up there. Okay, it's okay. I learned my lesson. Him I call deluded, Aggiwesana, who has not abandoned the outflowings that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. For it is with the non-abandoning of these outflowings that what is called deluded. Him I call undeluded, or she I call undeluded, who has abandoned the outflowings that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. For it is with the abandoning of the outflowings that one is undeluded. The Buddha, Aggiwesana, has abandoned the outflowings that defile and bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. He has cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump. A palm stump can't grow again. Done away with them so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Just as a palm tree whose crown is cut off is incapable of further growth, so too the Buddha has abandoned the outflowings that defiled. Done away with them so they are no longer subject to future arising. When this was said, Saccaka the Jain said, "It is wonderful, Master Gotama. It is marvelous how when Master Gotama is spoken to offensively again and again, assailed by discourteous courses of speech, the colour of his skin brightens and the colour of his face clears, as is to be expected of one who is accomplished and fully enlightened." I recall Master Gotama engaging, these are other senior spiritual leaders of that time, I remember engaging Purana Kassapa in debate, and then he prevaricated, led the talk aside, and showed anger, hate, and bitterness. But when Master Gotama is spoken to offensively again and again, assaulted by discourteous courses of speech, the colour of his skin brightens, and the colour of his face clears, as is to be expected of one who is accomplished and fully enlightened. I recall Master Gotama engaging Makali Gosala, Ajita Kesa Kambalin, Pakuta Kachayana, Sanjaya Balati Puta, and even Nigantanata Puta, the leader of the Jains, in debate. And then they prevaricated, led the talk aside, and showed anger, hate, and bitterness. But when Master Gotama is spoken to offensively again and again, assailed by discourteous courses of speech, the colour of his skin brightens and the colour of his face clears, as is to be expected of one who is accomplished and fully enlightened. And now, Master Gotama, we depart. We are busy and have much to do. Now is the time, Aggiwesana, to do as you think fit. Then Saccaka the Jain, having delighted and rejoiced in the Buddha's words, got up from his seat and departed. So ends the sutta. And now, questions. Comments? Complaints? Oh, is this actually done live on the internet? So we might have some internet questions? Oh, okay. Wow, they're being confounded.
Why do you think it's so compact, Ajahn? Why do you think everything's in there?
Why I think everything is in there? Because it shows much of the path, and they have, first of all, just overcoming the idea that you can get deep states of meditation just through going too far with renouncing the comfort of the body. And there the Buddha was going into a great detail about how this has probably happened. He really tortured his body when he was a young man, and how that just made his body weak and made it very difficult for him to enter upon in the deep meditations. And then that realization afterwards, that the time when he just got into a deep meditation as a kid, he was supposed to be, I think, 6 or 7 years of age. We never know for sure, but it was sitting under a tree, the shade of a tree, as a kid with nothing to do. Obviously, if kids in those days had iPhones and stuff, computers, it would never have happened. He would be just playing computer games or something. But fortunately, in those days, he had nothing to do, comfortable, and obviously had the memories of his previous lives to assist him, and managed to get into a deep state of meditation. And because of that, that was an important part of the Buddha's journey. Because he got into a deep state of meditation, he thought maybe that is the path to enlightenment, to Sambodhi. And of course, he realized, yes, it is. And it also mentioned, why are people afraid of the happiness in those deep meditations? And as a meditation teacher, that come across that again and again and again. People are getting very deep in their meditation, even in just the nimittas. And there's a sense that this is a bit too powerful for me. Exactly, for me. When there's a sense of self there, it's like there's something which is bigger than your idea of self, something which you cannot control. And when you have to give up control, that's scary for many people. So there was fear there. And the Buddha said, I will not be afraid of a pleasure which has nothing to do with the worldly pleasures. And so that meant that he decided to use that as his path to enlightenment. And also realized that you cannot do that if the body is so weak and emaciated. I have to say that he said it's difficult to do it, it's not impossible. But, he decided to look after his body. And at that time, his 5 disciples had been following him. Because after that prediction that he'd either become a wheel-turning monk or become a Buddha, one of those first 5 disciples was trying to follow him because of the prediction. And when they saw him just eating, not sort of feasting too much, but just eating, bathing and sleeping, then they thought that was indulging. And so because of that they left him. And you know that when he went back to Benares, to the deer park, to teach the first 5 disciples, first of all, they thought, they almost thought, here he comes again. This was our teacher before, but he'd given up striving. But they saw that something in his demeanor, even his face, made him very attracted to this teacher, who is now just not all skin and bones. But obviously something had happened. And that's when he gave the first teaching. I often ask people this, what's the first teaching of the Buddha? It was not the Four Noble Truths, it was the middle way. Because he'd just seen that was his number one obstacle at the time, trying to almost kill himself. But at the same time in this sutta, they have those beautiful 3 similes of the piece of wood. Sometimes people ask, my meditation is very difficult. What should I do? Please give me some tricks. And then the Buddha was saying this simile, the piece of wood. If you're too close to sensory pleasures, it's like this, your stick is wet, or it's sappy, it hasn't really dried out. That's one of the reasons why people do go and do range retreats, because there's very little sensory pleasures. You can really dry out. And as you dry out, the mind becomes so dry that it's easy to light up. And the simile of lighting up, I think I mentioned it before, the word jhana and jayati, it also means to burn. It's like a flame burning. So it has that also the indication of to get a jhana to basically light the mind up, that does need you to be away from sensory pleasures and to give yourself time to dry up. It's hard if you're in the water. It's hard if you're out of the water but haven't really dried out yet. But when you get a piece of wood which is a long way from the water, has been drying up for a while, then it's easy to take the fire. It's not impossible if it's a bit sappy, but it's much easier when it's dry. That's also, please excuse me, that's one of the reasons why we have monastic life. Try to be away from sensory desires. So I love that simile. And I haven't actually looked at that simile for quite a while. And then also, just the other thing which I like about the sutta is how it deals with when people give you offensive speech. Doesn't matter who you are, but there is a time, especially if you have something to teach, people say, no, that can't be right. So this is one of the reasons why if a person, does say something which is offensive, that's a good test of your teacher. Offend me. And to see what happens. Please don't take up. You're not going to do that, are you? No, Okay. Oh, maybe we'll do a couple of...
There's just one here, Ajahn.
There's just one here. Just do this one first. It just did get to me first of all. From New Zealand. I'll ask you two questions now. What does it mean, but such painful feeling, pleasant feeling, that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain? What it means in you that it didn't cause you a problem afterwards. In other words, sometimes if it invades the mind, basically it takes control over it. Just like countries try to invade another country to control it. Just even the painful feeling, the pleasant feeling, you look upon it as visitors. That too is anicca. And so either it doesn't remain, or the memory, the longing for it doesn't remain. And that was in particular because that was the question which Saccaka asked the Buddha at the beginning. Does feel extremely pleasurable sensations, and sometimes can experience painful sensations when he was first practicing, but they don't stay with him. Especially the painful feelings. These days, if you have such pain, sometimes it becomes traumatic. It remains in you for many, many years. But for him, there was enough wisdom there that didn't remain in him. Why it didn't remain in him, it doesn't explain. But you've heard me say before that the previous life, or a previous life of Buddha Gautama was as Jotipala under the previous Buddha Kassapa. Under Kassapa, that's in the Gatikara Sutta. Not many people talk about that, but it's there, Majjhima 64, and you can accept that as a truth if you accept the rest of the Majjhima Nikaya as truthful. So it's very, very likely that when the Buddha passed away, having lived as a monk with Kassapa the Buddha, I always say that he would have been a once-returner. Because that's how, I think the Buddha said, the most once-returners, most once-returners, this is the Sakadagamis, most of those get reborn in the Tusita realm. And when he came out, and first of all, I thought this was just exaggeration, just coming out from his mother's belly and speaking, "This is my last life, I'm the number one in the world." How could he know that unless he really was a once-returner? So anyway, if he was a once-returner, then of course, in his case, even though he wasn't fully enlightened yet, still he knew how to let go of those painful, unpleasant feelings. That's my take on it. You can argue with me, but anyway. Okay, another question. Are we told what happened to Saccaka? No, I don't think we were told. Does anyone know that? Maybe in some other sutta somewhere, but I don't know that. Why wasn't Lady Sujata giving rice pudding mentioned here? It was Lady Saccaka gave the Buddha this beautiful food which was meant for a heavenly being just before he sat under the Bodhi tree. But nothing much about that is mentioned here. You can't mention everything. But it was also part of the fact that the Buddha was eating good food and was sitting under the shade of a Bodhi tree. And if you've been over to Bodh Gaya, I was really fortunate to go over there in 1973, I think it was, to Bodh Gaya. There's hardly anybody there. So you can understand just how it was a very pleasant place to stay. And because it was a very pleasant place to stay, you could almost imagine the Buddha going there, finding a lovely tree. I went there over in July, August. This was in May when the Buddha went there. It would be dry and pretty cool, next to a river. And he could sit under that Bodhi tree really comfortably and not be disturbed. So he went to a comfortable place to meditate. And that idea of comfort, rather not indulgence, but comfort, that was important for the Buddha to make sure his body was healthy, was cool, was not being disturbed while he got into his deep meditations. So anyway, that's the questions here. Now from Narayan. Yeah. Oh, Eddie. Oh, Narayan had his hand up first.
When Prince Siddhartha sat under the rose apple tree, the sutta said that he had the first jhana. So was he instructed to do meditation? Because anyway, to have this first jhana, you need the 5 hindrances taken away. So how would he know if he was not instructed, or had it come naturally?
Yeah, I see what you mean. How could he call it the first jhana? He experienced it, but he taught this sutta after he was enlightened. So then he said, I had this experience as a young boy. He wouldn't have known it was the first jhana then. But then, because he said, what's the second jhana? But he experienced it then, and later on, when he was fully enlightened, and he could know all of the jhanas, that's where he gave it the title, the first jhana. But also, that I have come across a few people who've, some of them weren't even Buddhists, who actually came and they had these meditation experiences. They weren't really meditating, they didn't know what they were doing. And they spontaneously had these experiences of a first jhana. It was really weird. Lay people, I always call it like fluking a jhana, just pressing the letting go button, and just this is what happened. And some of those people were very shocked by it because of powerful experiencing and not knowing at all what was happening. And that example of that lady over in Penang who was going to see psychologists and psychiatrists, she had this experience, and she came to me, and when she described it, I said, oh, that's a jhana. And I added a bit more of the details. She said, yes, you know what you're talking about? And I said, yeah, you just fluked it. That's what it was. It's a wonderful experience. You're not going crazy. You haven't been invaded by aliens or anything. You just had a beautiful experience. Well done. And I don't know why she had that experience. Quite likely these were people who, like Siddhartha Gautama, had been monks or nuns in their previous life, had experienced these states before, but not in this life. And something inside of them could resonate with that. So for Siddhartha Gautama, you know, he had been a monk under the previous Buddha. And that's an amazing birth. I wonder why that is not emphasized more, because he would have been experiencing jhanas under the previous Buddha, surely, or something. So that's my take on it. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Sort of?
So probably the reason why it was not mentioned between that, he probably was about 7 years, was he? In that time?
Yeah, the time when he got the jhana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after that, it was not mentioned until he became striving to be a Buddha.
Yes,
So
indeed.
probably because that memory has faded away from the previous life. Would it be that?
Yes, could be. But I always remember that he says that one of the reasons he never considered it so important because of the pleasure of it. And at that time, you can see by not eating, trying not to breathe, that the way to enlightenment was trying to basically overcome the body by pushing its limits by what they call asceticism. And if you really want to become enlightened, really be ascetic. And it's worth it because you become enlightened and it's no problem anymore. But he tried it as much as he could and nothing happened, except lots of pain. And so this other part of not being ascetic, but being comfortable, not being indulgent, and just allowing the body to disappear and vanish, and getting into the jhanas. A pleasure which has nothing to do with the sensory pleasures of the five senses. That's why the Buddha often called those things not to be feared. That's our path. Eddie had a question.
Ajahn Brahm, very interesting sutta, especially read by you, on the Buddha's experiences before he gained enlightenment, how he nearly died, what came to my mind is the scene, whereby the Buddhists regard it as a middle way. He saw a boat passing by with a musician and his students, passing by, and the musician was saying, if you tune the guitar string too much, it will snap. And if you leave it too loose, it won't play. He heard this, and then what I mean is he thought about this thing, so he took some food, and then he shortly get enlightenment. So how would this fit in or what? That's from the film, Little Buddha.
Yeah. No, you get, of course, this is just finding that middle way. It's very easy just to miss that middle way and just to go into too much indulgence or go into too much asceticism. And a little example of that, a practical example, that I was always thought when I was especially a young monk, just cross your legs and sit, and if it hurts, doesn't mind, just be tough and see how long you can sit meditation for. And I never really got anywhere with trying to force a body to sit so long, without any comfort. And so then, that I started experimenting myself, that when I had a pain, I would look at it, and the first time I wanted to move, I'd say no. The second time I wanted to move, I'd say no. The third time I wanted to move, I would move. And sometimes it wasn't just getting up and walking, it was just moving my legs slightly. And I noticed that where I was in my meditation, I lost ground a bit. I went backwards. But then because my body was now comfortable, just by a slight movement, and I soon got back to where I was before, and I was managing to get deeper. And just that little bit of adjustment, it was worth it. You got much deeper that way. And of course, that was just an example there of you have to find a body which is reasonably comfortable. Of course, what happens next is that when you do get comfortable, and if you know how to meditate, the body vanishes. And that's the best of all. That story I love to tell, it inspires me that you could do this, that when first year in Thailand, all the mosquitoes, I mean there were hundreds of them. And because everyone else was just sitting there enduring it, I did too. And you would count those mosquitoes, 60 or 70 at a time. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. And it was very tough to bear. But then, I decided, well, there is another way. He asked Ajahn Chah, and he said, call them Ajahn mosquitoes. They're teaching you something. And I interpreted that as saying, when I'm meditating, I can't mess around. I can't go thinking about things or thinking what we had for dinner or we had for lunch this morning or whatever. All I would do is go straight, to the body. As I teach in the meditations I teach here, is go into the body, really get to know the body, and then calm it all down and calm it till it gets so peaceful, and then it can disappear. And I do that because that's how I practice. When my body is relaxed, I can go and watch peace or watch my breath, and it's like the body doesn't exist anymore, like you've gone inside of it, and you can't feel it. And that was a time when I had to do that. Mosquitoes were my teacher, because if I didn't do that, you'd be bothered by those mosquitoes for the next couple of hours. So you just went into a nice deep meditation, and you couldn't feel your body. And that was a wonderful escape, from the mosquitoes buzzing all around. These days I look at those other monks who I sat with, and they weren't doing that at all. They were just enduring. How can you do that? I didn't have so much endurance, but I had the wisdom of being able to get free from my body by going inside. So that's how you look after your body. You don't be ascetic and just endure, bite after bite after bite. There is the other way of calming your body down.
So we shouldn't go into extremes in our practice?
Exactly, don't go to extremes now.
Thank you.
But you've got to find out where that middle path is. It's very subtle. You know that it's a middle path just when the body can vanish. The body's comfortable. Like these days, how do you go to sleep at night? If you're not in a comfortable place, it's too hot or too cold, it's very difficult to go to sleep. If you've got mosquitoes buzzing around all over you, it's almost impossible to go to sleep. If you're worrying too much about the past or the future, you can't go to sleep. But if you're comfortable, you're kind to yourself. You get up and get an extra blanket if you need one. Or you can open a window if it's too hot. And if you're kind to yourself, saying, well, all the thinking in the world, I'm not at work now, I can't do anything. So I'm going to leave that alone and think about it in the morning. As a senior monk, there's lots of things I should be thinking about, but quite often I'm irresponsible. So I go to bed, I decide to meditate, I'll think about that in the morning. And I noticed in the last 6 months or so that any problems which you have in the monastery and the Buddhist society, you don't think about it at night time. And in the morning, when you wake up, I could do that now, and you have great insights. It's much easier to see solutions when you've rested. So I can know how to have a middle way by just, when there's a time, just leave it alone. It's time to rest, it's time to meditate. Let go. Did you have a question there? Are you still doing something?
Well, that was Sadhu, like when you
Okay.
said, compartmentalize it, the meditation, don't take it to bed with you,
Yeah,
get up the following day, the insight.
yeah.
Sadhu.
It's like when you're not thinking about it, there's something still working in there. I'm not really aware of it. And great answers come up when you're not pushing them. Any other questions, comments or complaints? Any more questions on here? Yeah. Okay, so another question on here. I can see it. Can you please explain what happens to the consciousness according to Buddhist philosophy once someone passes away? As in steps. Huh? Okay, when somebody passes away, first of all, the 5 senses, this is for everybody, sort of stops. That's called passing away. The eyes don't respond. You can shout in somebody's ear, they don't respond. I think, what is the way I think I read some article somewhere about a year ago, and they said it's really hard to know when somebody has actually died. Sometimes still people make mistakes. And they say, they often put a light in the eye, but they still, apparently doctors, I think they were making noise in their ear. Hey, are you still there? Or something. Is that true? Any doctors here in palliative care? But anyway, when those 5 senses stop, and you don't respond, they call that dead in medicine. But of course, that's what happens when you get into jhanas. So any doctors here, please, if any of the monks or nuns here, or any of the meditators here, if you sort of, your 5 senses stop, please don't take you to the morgue. You're not dead yet. And the difference is, and there was one case when this actually happened, the guy was still warm. That is the difference. If the body is still warm, you're not dead, you're in a deep meditation. And it's really hard to tell the difference, except for the warmth. So the 5 senses stop, those consciousness, then the mind consciousness, quite often it constructs a mind-made body. It's like, it's a mind that's constructing the senses, not the brain. And so that's actually sometimes when, people can see sort of ghosts and stuff, and the ghosts can sometimes tell you something, or they can sometimes leave messages or something. That's rare, but it sometimes happens. But as for you, the mind is making these types of consciousness which are similar to the ordinary consciousnesses. And then a lot of the times, not all the time, but sometimes people see the beautiful light, and they go towards the light when they die. I've often mentioned this, you've heard me say this before. That is the same experience as the nimittas. But for this particular case, if it's in meditation, you're still alive, but the 5 senses are being suppressed. They'll come back afterwards. And you see these beautiful mind objects called the nimittas. If it's a death, you see this beautiful mind consciousness called the nimitta. And nowadays there are people who do have near-death experiences. And I'm always interested to see what they say next. They go to this place, it's like a jhana experience, beautiful bliss and peace. Sometimes they call bliss like real true love, extreme love. Well, no, I can't call it extreme, that's not the word, but intense, pure. And you've got to admit that the blisses of the first jhana are like that. It's just, you can call it ecstasy, you can call it just pure love or whatever. So you can recognize some of the experiences which people have when they get close to death, but they come back again afterwards. But for people who are meditators, after a while, even the mind consciousness stops creating things. And even that can become still and peaceful and stop. It depends actually Who's doing the dying process? Oh my goodness, there's another question here. Dear Ajahn, it takes me so long before I calm my mind in meditation, maybe 45 minutes. After another 10 minutes I start feeling pains in my legs and spin. So I have only 10 minutes deep meditation. See if you can remember that story of the fire stick. I think you're maybe living too close to the water and too wet and sappy. So it's not a case of just trying to find more effort, but look at your lifestyle. How are you living? If you want some more deep meditation, try and live further away from things which stimulate you. And last question here. Oh, where's it gone? How is breathless meditation even possible? Indeed, when you try to hold your breath, it takes a lot of willpower. And sometimes the breath does something else, I'm not quite sure. But if you want to know how breathless meditation really is done, that's actually when you go into the deep meditations. You're so still that the body doesn't need any breath. The breath is there to keep the metabolism going. Your metabolism is so calm, you don't need to breathe. That's why sometimes some people in deep meditation, you look at them, it looks like their tummy's not even moving. You're so deep, you're so still. So, and that was Ajahn Chah's story. That was the time when he was, he'd had his stroke, and he had a medic, trained medic, and usually 2 or 3 monks looking after him until he finally passed away. And quite often he'd be laying down there on his bed and stop breathing. And of course the medic on duty freaked out. You stop breathing, he's going to die. And the other one said, leave him alone, he's just getting into the deep meditations. And so on one occasion, the story went around Wat Pa Pong afterwards, and I was over here at the time, so I heard it over here, that he was so peacefully stopped breathing. The medic checked everything, he really wasn't breathing. And so the medic decided, instead of trying to get him out of whatever he was doing, the medic decided to take blood samples every, I think, 5 minutes or something. And he always knew, because the blood was oxygenated all the time, even though there was no discernible breathing happening. Because the blood was oxygenated, he didn't know how the oxygen was getting in there, but anyway, it was oxygenated, so they left him alone. He was fine, he came out afterwards. That's a typical experience in meditation. Only usually when we're meditating, we're not having doctors around taking blood samples or seeing if we're breathing or not. So that's how it works. But not by just holding the breath. Holding the breath by force doesn't make you still. It just makes you very tight. You can only hold it for such a long time. But the real breathingless meditation becomes so still that your metabolism just doesn't need any oxygen. It's almost like hibernating. Anyway, is there any other questions there? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, please.
Ajahn, just talking about the middle path, I can recall reading that someone asked the Buddha if non-self meant seeking annihilation, and he said, it's not being and it's not not being. There's a path between being and not being.
Correct.
Is that another middle path, or the same
Yes.
middle path dressed up differently?
In other words, it's a process. So things coming and going. So it's not something there in the beginning, which is there in the middle, which is there in the end. It's not that there's nothing there. It's a process. This causing that, which causes something else. That's the whole flow of Sue, who I've known for many years. You're not who I knew when I first met you. You know where I first met Sue? She was the president of the Theosophical Society here in Perth. And then I used to give talks there. And then Sue became a Buddhist. And so they stopped me giving talks at the Theosophical Society afterwards. It wasn't quite like that, but close. Anyway, that was good fun. So yeah, it is. That's why there's nothing gets annihilated. There's just a process comes to an end. Okie dokie. So we can finish off now? Very good. So we do the Arahant, we usually do the bow, the Arahant Samma Sambuddha. Put this over here. And thank you all for listening. It's my first Sutta class for a while. It's a bit rusty. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Suakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasmi Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Very good. You're coming to monastery tomorrow.